What if one forgotten government report quietly changed everything historians believed about ancient North America? Not through a dramatic discovery, not through buried gold, not through a lost city, but through thousands of careful excavations, hundreds of ancient earthworks, and years of patient scientific investigation. In 1885, the Smithsonian Institution published a report that challenged one of the biggest historical mysteries in America. For decades, people believed that the enormous earthen mounds scattered across the eastern United States had been built by a mysterious civilization that disappeared long before Native American tribes arrived. It was a popular story. Newspapers repeated it. Travelers wrote about it. Even respected scholars accepted it. But there was one problem. Very little evidence supported it. Instead of relying on old stories, the Smithsonian decided to investigate the mystery the only way science could, by following the evidence buried beneath the ground. What archaeologists discovered would permanently reshape American history. And today, more than 140 years later, that investigation remains one of the most important archaeological studies ever conducted in North America. To understand why the 1885 report mattered so much, we first need to travel back to the early 19th century. Across states like Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Wisconsin, enormous earthworks covered the landscape. Some were shaped like circles, others formed perfect squares, some stretched for hundreds of feet across open fields. The largest rose high above the surrounding land, silently overlooking rivers that had flowed beside them for thousands of years. Local communities had lived near these structures for generations. Many respected them, others wondered who had built them. Some farmers accidentally uncovered pottery, stone tools, copper ornaments, and ancient human burials while ploughing their fields. Each discovery deepened the mystery. Who were these builders? When had they lived? Why had they created such massive earthworks without modern machines? As more settlers moved west during the early 1800s, curiosity grew even stronger. Writers began publishing theories that sounded exciting but lacked evidence. Some claimed the builders came from Europe, others believed they were descendants of the Egyptians. A few even suggested they belonged to one of the lost tribes of Israel. Every few years, a new theory appeared. Each promised to solve the mystery. Almost none relied on careful archaeology. The truth was much less dramatic. At that time, archaeology was still a young science. Modern excavation methods did not yet exist. Carbon dating had not been invented. Nar analysis was still more than a century away. Researchers often relied on personal opinions instead of systematic investigation. Without reliable evidence, imagination filled the gaps. One newspaper might describe the mounds as proof of a forgotten empire. Another might call them evidence of an advanced race that vanished before recorded history. The stories attracted attention because people naturally enjoy mysteries, but good history cannot depend on exciting stories alone. It must depend on evidence. That is exactly where the Smithsonian Institution entered the picture. Founded in 1846, the Smithsonian had become America's leading center for scientific research, natural history, and archaeology. Its mission was simple: increase knowledge, share knowledge, preserve knowledge. As reports of ancient earthworks continued arriving from across the country, Smithsonian researchers realized that no one had ever completed a large-scale scientific investigation of these remarkable sites. Small excavations had taken place. Individual scholars had published observations, but no one had studied hundreds of mound sites using the same methods. Without consistent evidence, the debate continued year after year. The Smithsonian wanted answers, not opinions, real answers. To accomplish this enormous task, the institution appointed an experienced researcher named Cyrus to lead one of the largest archaeological investigations America had ever attempted. Thomas understood something many earlier writers had overlooked. If the mystery was going to be solved, researchers needed to stop asking, "Who do we think built these mounds?" Instead, they needed to ask a different question. What does the evidence actually say? That simple change transformed the entire investigation. Rather than beginning with a conclusion, Thomas began with observation. His teams travelled across thousands of miles. They measured earthworks. They drew detailed maps. They recorded every excavation with unusual care. Artifacts were catalogued instead of simply collected. Burial sites were documented. Construction methods were compared from one region to another. It was slow work, sometimes exhausting work. But science often moves slowly because accuracy matters more than speed. As the investigation expanded, researchers noticed something remarkable. Although the mounds varied greatly in size and shape, many shared common building techniques. The soil had been layered carefully. Stone tools appeared repeatedly. Pottery styles followed recognizable regional patterns. Copper ornaments matched materials already known from indigenous communities. Nothing suggested the sudden appearance of an unknown civilization. Instead, the evidence pointed toward long cultural development across many generations. Still, Thomas refused to rush toward conclusions. One discovery alone proves very little. Hundreds of discoveries begin forming patterns, and patterns reveal history. Year after year, the Smithsonian teams continued their fieldwork. By the time the investigation neared completion, they had examined hundreds of mound sites across the eastern United States. The amount of information collected was unlike anything attempted before in American archaeology. Old assumptions were beginning to collapse, not because someone found one spectacular artifact, but because thousands of carefully recorded observations all pointed in the same direction. Yet one excavation would become especially important. Inside a mound that many people believed belonged to a lost civilization, archaeologists uncovered evidence that directly connected its builders to the ancestors of Native American communities already known from historical records. If that connection proved true, it would overturn one of America's oldest archaeological myths. And that was exactly the question the next stage of the Smithsonian investigation set out to answer. By the mid-1880s, the Smithsonian's investigation had become something far larger than anyone had expected. What began as a simple attempt to study a few ancient earthworks had grown into one of the most ambitious archaeological projects ever carried out in North America. For years, Cyrus Thomas and his research teams traveled across the eastern United States, carefully documenting mound after mound. They crossed river valleys, forests, farmland, and open plains, visiting places where these mysterious structures had stood quietly for centuries. Unlike many earlier explorers, Thomas was not looking for treasure. He was looking for patterns. Every excavation followed a careful process. Before digging began, the team measured the mound's height, width, and shape. Detailed sketches were made. The surrounding landscape was recorded. Only then did the excavation begin, layer by layer, with every discovery carefully documented. This may sound ordinary today, but in the late 19th century, it represented a major step forward for American archaeology. Previous investigators often focused only on unusual objects. Thomas wanted the complete story. He believed that even the smallest piece of pottery or the position of a burial could reveal something important about the people who had built these monuments. As the months turned into years, the evidence continued to grow. The researchers examined hundreds of mound sites across states including Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Wisconsin. Every location added another piece to the puzzle. Some mounds served as burial places, others appeared to support buildings. Several were used for ceremonies or important community gatherings. The famous geometric earthworks in Ohio showed remarkable planning, with circles, squares, and connecting pathways laid out with surprising precision. Elsewhere, large platform mounds rose high above the surrounding landscape, suggesting they had once supported temples, council buildings, or the homes of important leaders. Although each region had its own traditions, the investigators noticed something remarkable. The construction methods showed gradual development rather than sudden appearance. The mounds had not been built all at once. They had been expanded, repaired, and reused over many generations. This suggested long-lasting communities rather than a mysterious civilization that had suddenly appeared and disappeared. The artifacts told a similar story. Stone tools were carefully shaped from local materials. Clay pottery displayed styles already familiar from Native American archaeological sites. Copper ornaments reflected trade networks that stretched across hundreds of miles. Shell beads from distant coastal regions appeared alongside objects made from local stone. These discoveries revealed something fascinating. Ancient North America was far more connected than many people had imagined. Communities traded goods across enormous distances. Ideas traveled along rivers. Craftsmanship developed over centuries. These were not isolated settlements. They were part of complex cultural networks. One discovery after another continued pointing toward the same conclusion. Then came one of the investigation's most important observations. Earlier writers had argued that the mound builders used advanced technologies unknown to Native Americans. But the Smithsonian teams found no evidence supporting that claim. The tools used to construct the earthworks matched tools already associated with indigenous cultures. The pottery styles evolved naturally from earlier traditions. Burial customs showed clear similarities with practices recorded among Native American groups. Instead of finding evidence for a vanished race, the investigators kept finding evidence of continuity. Culture had changed over time. But it had not disappeared. The builders and their descendants were connected. This realization challenged decades of popular belief. Many Americans had accepted the idea that an unknown civilization had created the mounds before being destroyed or replaced. It was a dramatic story. But dramatic stories are not always true. Thomas understood that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and despite years of careful excavation, that evidence simply did not exist. Instead, every carefully recorded excavation strengthened a different conclusion. The ancestors of Native American peoples had built these remarkable earthworks over many centuries. It was a conclusion based not on one spectacular discovery, but on hundreds of consistent observations. That distinction mattered enormously. Science does not depend on a single exciting artifact. It depends on repeated evidence leading to the same answer. The Smithsonian investigation became a powerful example of that principle. Still, Thomas knew that many people would question his findings. The mound builder myth had become deeply rooted in popular culture. Books, newspapers, and public lectures had repeated it for decades. Changing people's minds would require more than a simple statement. It would require overwhelming documentation. So the research continued. Excavation notes filled hundreds of pages. Detailed maps recorded mound locations across the eastern United States. Illustrations documented artifacts exactly as they were found. Measurements were carefully checked and compared. Nothing was left to guesswork. Finally, after years of field research, the Smithsonian prepared its conclusions. In 1885, the first major findings were presented, and the work eventually culminated in Cyrus Thomas's landmark Smithsonian report, which systematically examined the evidence gathered from across the region. The report did not rely on speculation, it relied on archaeology. It showed that the earthworks represented the achievements of multiple indigenous cultures developing over long periods of time, not the work of a mysterious lost civilization. For many historians, it marked a turning point. American archaeology was beginning to move away from myths and toward evidence-based research. But not everyone accepted the new conclusions. Some writers refused to abandon the older stories. They continued publishing books about vanished races, lost empires, and mysterious builders. Those ideas would survive well into the 20th century, and in some cases they still appear on the internet today. This created a new mystery. If the Smithsonian's evidence was so detailed, if hundreds of excavations pointed to the same conclusion, why did the myth of the mysterious mound builders refuse to disappear? The answer lies not beneath the earth, but in the powerful influence of old beliefs and how difficult they can be to replace, even when the evidence says otherwise. By the time the Smithsonian completed its investigation, thousands of pages of notes, maps, sketches, and excavation records had been collected. Every mound that had been measured, every artifact that had been catalogued, every burial site that had been carefully documented, pointed toward the same conclusion. The evidence no longer supported the popular story of a mysterious lost race. Instead, it revealed something even more remarkable. The builders of North America's great earthworks were the ancestors of Native American cultures that had lived across the Mississippi Valley, the Ohio River Valley, and much of the eastern United States for thousands of years. It was a conclusion reached not through opinion, but through evidence. When the Smithsonian published its findings, they challenged one of the most deeply rooted beliefs of the 19th century. For decades, many Americans had assumed that native peoples could not have built monuments on such a massive scale. That assumption had influenced books, newspapers, museums, and even school lessons, yet archaeology was now telling a very different story. The earthworks were not mysterious because their builders were unknown. They were mysterious because later generations had forgotten how advanced these ancient societies truly were. This changed the way historians viewed North American civilization. Instead of searching for a vanished empire, researchers began asking better questions. How were these communities organized? How many people lived there? What technologies did they develop? How far did their trade networks reach? These questions opened an entirely new chapter in American archaeology. As scholars looked more closely at the evidence, they discovered that many mound-building societies were far more sophisticated than earlier generations had imagined. Some communities planned their towns with extraordinary precision. Large ceremonial centers were carefully arranged around open plazas. Platform mounds were built layer by layer over many generations. Wooden buildings once stood on top of these earthen platforms, serving as gathering places, religious centers, or homes for important leaders. Building structures of this size required careful planning. Thousands of workers had to move enormous amounts of soil using baskets and simple hand tools. There were no bulldozers, no cranes, no modern machinery. Everything depended on cooperation, organization, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The investigation also revealed something equally impressive. These ancient societies were connected through long-distance trade. Excavations uncovered shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, stone from distant quarries, rare minerals from hundreds of miles away. These materials had travelled across rivers, forests, and mountains long before European ships reached North America. The discoveries showed that ideas and goods moved across vast distances. Ancient North America was not isolated, it was connected. One of the most fascinating examples came from what archaeologists now call the Hopewell culture. Rather than a single kingdom or empire, the Hopewell represented a network of communities that shared artistic styles, ceremonial traditions, and trade connections across a huge area. Beautifully crafted pipes carved from stone, copper ornaments shaped into birds and animals, delicate jewelry made from shells, all reflected extraordinary craftsmanship. Nearby, researchers also studied the remains of the Mississippian culture, which flourished centuries later. These communities built some of the largest earthen monuments ever constructed north of Mexico. Their greatest cities supported thousands of residents. Some featured wide plazas, defensive walls, and towering platform mounds that dominated the landscape. These discoveries helped historians understand that North America possessed complex civilizations long before European arrival. Not identical to those of Egypt, Rome, or China, but impressive in their own unique ways. Yet changing scientific understanding proved easier than changing public opinion. Many people welcomed the Smithsonian's conclusions, others did not. Some writers continued repeating the old mound builder stories because they were exciting. Mysteries sold books, legends attracted readers. Simple stories often spread faster than careful research. Even today, you can still find claims that the mounds were built by ancient Egyptians, lost tribes, Atlanteans, or unknown civilizations with no connection to Native Americans. These ideas continue appearing in books, television programs, and across the internet. But modern archaeology has continued testing those claims. Again and again, the evidence supports the same conclusion first reached by the Smithsonian investigation. Radiocarbon dating, excavations, settlement studies, artifact comparisons, and, more recently, genetic research all point toward the ancestors of indigenous North American peoples as the builders of these remarkable earthworks. Science has not stood still since 1885. It has continued gathering evidence, and with every new discovery, the picture has become clearer. That is one of the greatest strengths of archaeology. It does not depend on preserving old ideas. It depends on following new evidence wherever it leads. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Smithsonian investigation was not simply who built the mounds, it was how history should be studied. The researchers did not begin with the answer they wanted. They allowed the evidence to guide them. That approach transformed archaeology from speculation into a disciplined science. Today, nearly a century and a half later, Cyrus Thomas's investigation is still remembered because it demonstrated the value of careful observation over popular belief. But one question still remains. If the Smithsonian helped solve one of America's greatest archaeological mysteries in 1885, what have archaeologists discovered since then? Have modern excavations confirmed those early conclusions, or have new discoveries revealed an even bigger story hidden beneath the ancient landscapes of North America? The answer takes us from 19th century field notebooks to 21st century science, and it shows that the story of America's ancient civilizations is still being written today. Nearly 140 years have passed since the Smithsonian published the report that changed American archaeology. The world has transformed in ways Cyrus Thomas could never have imagined. Airplanes cross continents in hours. Satellites orbit the Earth. Scientists can analyze DNA from ancient remains. Archaeologists use lasers mounted on aircraft to reveal hidden landscapes beneath forests. Yet despite all these advances, one question remains surprisingly important. Was the Smithsonian right? Did later discoveries confirm the conclusions reached in the 1880s? Or would modern science reveal a completely different story? The answer is remarkable. Again and again, modern archaeology has confirmed the central conclusion of the Smithsonian investigation. But it has also revealed something even more impressive than Thomas could have imagined. The ancient civilizations of North America were larger, more connected, and more sophisticated than most 19th century researchers ever realized. Throughout the 20th century, archaeologists continued excavating mound sites across the United States. New discoveries emerged from Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and dozens of other locations. Each excavation added another piece to the puzzle. Instead of contradicting the Smithsonian's findings, the evidence strengthened them. Radiocarbon dating, developed decades after Thomas completed his work, allowed researchers to determine the age of ancient sites with far greater accuracy. For the first time, archaeologists could establish detailed timelines. The results showed that mound building was not the achievement of a single civilization. Instead, multiple indigenous cultures built earthworks over thousands of years. Some of the earliest mounds were constructed more than 5,000 years ago. Others continued to be used long after the first Europeans arrived in North America. This revealed a history far deeper than many people had previously understood. Ancient North America was not a blank landscape waiting for civilization. It already contained thriving societies with rich traditions, complex beliefs, and remarkable engineering skills. Perhaps nowhere is this more visible than at Cahokia Mound State Historic Site. Located near present-day St. Louis, Cahokia was once the largest city north of Mexico. Around the year 1100 AD, it may have supported tens of thousands of residents. Its largest structure, known as Monk's Mound, remains one of the biggest earthworks ever built in North America. When early European explorers arrived centuries later, the city had already declined. Its story had largely faded from memory. Yet modern archaeology has revealed a thriving urban centre with organised construction, long-distance trade, and sophisticated social systems. Discoveries like Cahokia helped historians understand that the mound builders were not mysterious outsiders. They were part of the long and diverse history of indigenous North America. Modern technology has continued uncovering new details. One of the most important tools today is called LiDAR, by sending laser pulses from aircraft toward the ground. LiDAR can create detailed maps of landscapes hidden beneath trees and vegetation. Features invisible from the ground suddenly become visible. Ancient roads appear. Earthworks emerge from forests. Settlement patterns become easier to understand. In many cases, archaeologists have discovered previously unknown structures using this technology. Imagine how amazed 19th century researchers would be if they could see these digital maps. What once required years of surveying can now be visualized with incredible precision. Yet even with all this technology, the most important lesson remains unchanged. Evidence matters. The Smithsonian report succeeded because it relied on careful observation rather than speculation. That principle still guides archaeology today. When new discoveries are made, researchers ask the same questions Thomas asked more than a century ago. What does the evidence show? What can we prove? What remains uncertain? These questions protect history from becoming fiction. And in an age of viral claims and internet myths, that lesson may be more important than ever. One reason the mound builder myth survived for so long was because it offered a dramatic story. People enjoy mysteries. They enjoy lost civilizations and hidden secrets. Sometimes those stories are entertaining. But real history is often even more fascinating. The truth revealed by archaeology is not smaller than the myth. It is bigger. Instead of a vanished race appearing from nowhere, we find thousands of years of cultural development. Instead of mysterious outsiders, we discover generations of skilled builders, traders, artists, farmers, and leaders who shaped the continent long before European arrival. The real story is not about disappearance. It is about continuity. It is about people adapting, innovating, and passing knowledge from one generation to the next. And that may be the most important legacy of the 1885 Smithsonian report. It helped shift attention away from myths and toward the achievements of real people. People whose accomplishments had too often been ignored or misunderstood. Today, archaeologists continue making discoveries. New sites are excavated every year. Ancient artifacts emerge from the ground. Advanced scientific techniques reveal information that previous generations could only dream about. The story is still growing. The investigation is still continuing. And somewhere beneath a field, a forest, or a riverbank, another piece of the puzzle may still be waiting to be found. Looking back, it is remarkable how much began with a simple question. Who built the mounds? For decades, the answer seemed hidden behind speculation and legend. Then came a group of researchers willing to do something different. They measured, they excavated, they documented, they followed the evidence, and in doing so, they changed American archaeology forever. The 1885 Smithsonian report did more than solve a mystery. It helped establish a new way of understanding the past, a way based on evidence rather than assumption, on investigation rather than rumor, on history rather than myth. And that is why, nearly a century and a half later, its legacy still matters. Because every great discovery begins the same way, not with certainty, but with curiosity, and the willingness to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Thank you for joining us on the Vertical Archive. If you enjoy authentic forgotten history, archaeology, ancient America, historical mysteries, and evidence-based documentaries, be sure to subscribe. Because the past is never truly buried. Sometimes it is simply waiting for someone to uncover it.